Greetings, my friends. Welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White. I'm thrilled to be here with you this week. I hope that you're getting much done this summer, that you're also taking care of yourself, having some time to relax as you're also preparing for the new school year. For all of you leaders out there, educators, for those that have, kiddos at home, I hope you are really enjoying that time with your family. With that said, I do want to transition and start making some announcements. First things first, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast will be featured on Spotify and on the X Factor EDU network with Dr. Matthew Joseph. I also wanted to remind you guys to follow me on social media platforms where you'll also find this podcast as well. Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indy Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indy238. YouTube is India White123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. I also wanted to encourage you guys, whenever you get a chance, to please check out my website whenever you get a chance. And that is going to be www.india-white.com. And to remind you of some upcoming events, I'll be joining you guys in California at the Silicon Valley Math Summit, the math conference there. Thank you to all of the leaders there for having me on board. I'll be joining many of you in Minnesota as well at the end of the month. Looking forward to training you guys in your school districts. Thank you for the opportunity. I also will be seeing you guys at NCSM and at NCTM. We will also be at ICTM. I'll also be at OCTM, and I'll also be at ATMNE and also the Northwest Math Council. I'll be at that Northwest Math Conference as well, just helping you guys, working with you. Let's figure this thing out together. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you to those that have been reaching out and, seeing how I can come aboard to help, to assist you as we're trying to develop grit and, bridge this achievement gap the best that we know how. I also wanted to remind you to check out the Grit Mini Workshop on Grassroots Workshops website. Check it out, see if that's a good fit for you and your rock stars on your campus. If you're looking forward to being on this podcast, or if you're wanting to just reach out to me, you can send me an email at india.white.123@gmail.com, and we'll take care of it. You can also check out my website. There's a place that you can go to join this podcast as well on the website, www.india-white.com. Now, with that said, I want to go into my favorite topic, one of my favorite topics, which is grit. And I want to talk about an element of grit and how it's related to student achievement. So we'll be talking about how grit, self-efficacy, and motivation impact student achievement. And so first things first, I do want to kind of go into an article that I found for us. It's a scholarly article that talks about a bunch of research. It's really dorky. I'll share it with you guys so that if you want to take it and use it, on the side, you can. Lots of information there. And then we'll go into a couple of articles and even a little video where we have an expert that's explaining some of these things to us so that we don't have to do the work. They've done it for us. So let's get right into this. And this, because it's going to talk about grit, self-efficacy, and motivation. And they're talking about the adult population and just what they found. This was published in 2021 by De La Cruz et al. So you'll see all these rock stars here that did the study. And so let's get into it. So it says, the study, it examined relationships between grit personality, self-efficacy, motivation, and the readiness to change index toward exercise. So they're talking about exercising and whatnot, but I want us to look at this article because I want us to understand what each of these variables are. So they had a measurement model, structural equation model that were assessed, provided information to develop a psychological intervention program based on grit, personality, and motivation with the aim of increasing the number of participants who engage in exercise. So this is pretty cool for us out there that are trying to really work out. But what I want us to do is I want us to really focus on the definition of these. And first things first, they're going to talk about grit and the grit personality. And so they're saying here the grit personality has been associated with self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is self-efficacy. The definition of self-efficacy, it's defined as the belief that people have about their own ability to organize and execute the necessary courses of action. So it's your belief in yourself to get something done. And Bandura is huge. And this backs much of my research on the emphasis and the importance of self-efficacy when we're trying to motivate a student or, cultivate grit in a student. And so they say here, again, self-efficacy is defined as the belief that people have about their own ability to organize and execute the necessary courses of action to attain specific achievements. And so it says, for instance, modifying a behavior or conduct with regard to a particular habit. So the self-efficacy theory suggests that control and personal action are two crucial factors for the individual to develop self-efficacy. So in other words, an individual that's seeking to work on self-efficacy must first convince themselves that they are in control of the situation. That's huge, right? And that their actions uphold an intention and motivation. So they're holding themselves accountable by first believing that they have control of the situation, and that there's also motivation behind that. And so, look, they continue. They say in a recent study, this person here, Ciascio, looks like, explored the relationships between grit and its dimensions, perseverance of effort, consistency of interest, and self-efficacy towards exercise. In 366 students, they found that grit and perseverance of effort were positively correlated with self-efficacy towards exercising, right? Which, whereas consistency of interest was not. So they might not have an interest here or there, but if you're able to have a perseverance in their effort towards working out, and then having self-efficacy as well, that was going to help to really motivate their grit levels. And so then they go more into the concept of motivating. So let's look into motivation. So it says motivation, on the other hand, is another variable that has been widely employed to explain behaviors towards exercise. So motivation conveys the energy, intensity, and direction of behavior. And so the self-determination theory, motivation is seen as a gradient that varies according to the level of volition or self-determination of behaviors, which is like that grittiness, right? Where the most and least are in self-determined forms of intrinsic and amotivation, respectively. Okay. And it says between these forms of motivation is extrinsic motivation, which has different types of regulation, right? Depending on the levels of self-determination. There's integrated regulation, there's identified regulation, introjected regulation, and external regulation. So they're really dorking it out on us here. And so they're going to talk about these different types of self-determination, different levels of it. And so it says the most self-determined motivation is intrinsic motivation, which is characterized by behaviors exercised for the sole enjoyment or pleasure, which is hard sometimes in a math class because sometimes students aren't necessarily interested in going to math class, let alone learning about math. So to get them to that place, you do need other factors to kind of increase that level of intrinsic motivation. So it says here, integrated regulation is characterized because the behavior is carried out freely. The individual, they evaluate the behavior and they act in accordance with their principles and their needs. And then they say identified regulation, it refers to a conscious assessment of an objective or behavior. This is related to aspects that are relevant. So I must exercise because it's important to me, right? And then, of course, they have introjected regulation, which talks about self-approval, ego enhancement, and pride. Okay. And so, like, you're going to take a selfie or, you're trying to win a contest or something. And so very interested. And then it says external regulation, external demand, expecting some reward or avoiding some punishment. Right. That's the lowest level of self-determination for extrinsic. So there's different tiers to extrinsic motivation. Okay, so let's keep going. So then it says SDT, that's the self-determined theory. It indicates that these regulations can be grouped into a broader sense to form an autonomous motivation versus controlled motivation. So there's different types of motivation here. So autonomous motivation stems from an internal feeling where the person shows the need to explore the environment and the curiosity and the pleasure experienced from carrying out an activity for the mere sake of doing it. So autonomous, they just want to do it. They're curious. Okay. And they say that there's studies between self-efficacy and different types of motivation around like physical activities and whatnot. And they found that there is a positive and significant correlation between self-efficacy and autonomous and controlled motivation. So very interesting. But they're saying that not necessarily that is the case between self-efficacy and amotivation, which we spoke about amotivation earlier. So amotivation is just the absence of all of the other types of motivation. So basically, there's like nothing going on with amotivation. Okay, let's keep going. So looking at this, I think that it's important. Some things that we can take from this so far is that when you're dealing with self-efficacy, there are different levels to it. There's a self-determination theory that affects all of this, and that there are different motivation levels and different types of motivation. We went over 4 different types. We usually know extrinsic, intrinsic, but they talked about amotivation and they talked about the other motivation that was listed. So I think it's interesting that we really understand for ourselves the different types of motivation and how we can tie that into instructional delivery as we're teaching students, or, as we are motivating students or teachers on our campus, how we can, help to increase their motivation levels. So with that said, that was kind of cool. Now, I do want to kind of take a break from that because I want to show you a video that is going to talk to us about self-efficacy. So I want to talk about self-efficacy now and what is it all about? Where did it come from? So here's some really cool and see what they say.
Now, Albert Bandura developed the self-efficacy theory of motivation, and he was born in 1925 and is a Canadian psychologist. And he described the theory in his book, Self-Efficacy, The Exercise of Control. According to the model, there are 4 factors that determine self-efficacy and in turn our performance for a task. So the factors are firstly experience, and this refers to your past experience of completing similar tasks. And in fact, this is the most important factor in the theory. So what this means is that if you performed a similar task well in the past, then you were more likely to be confident that you can complete similar tasks well in the future.
I want to stop there because what I want to say is this makes sense as to why students struggle then with anxiety or feeling like they're not a math person if they don't do well. Because like he said, that first level of performance, that first tier of self-efficacy is low because they did not have a positive experience in their past, math life, or, when they're going over math with their families and things, it was not necessarily in the brightest light. So this is why it's important for us to cultivate grit through self-efficacy for our students so that we can help them to heal and to grow as they're learning and performing in our classes. So let's continue to go forward with.
Next, we have vicarious experience. You can develop self-efficacy vicariously by watching other people perform the task. So if you watch someone similar to you perform a task and they succeed, then your self-efficacy will increase. Counter to that, if you watch someone similar to you perform a task but they fail, then this can negatively affect your self-efficacy. The third factor is social persuasion. You can increase your self-efficacy if others give you encouragement that you can perform a task. Likewise, your self-efficacy will decrease if you receive discouraging or disparaging remarks about your ability to perform a task. And the final factor is physiological feedback. When confronted with a task, you experience a sensation from your body. How you interpret these signals will impact your self-efficacy. So, for example, Say you're due to perform a presentation to a large group of people. You might experience butterflies in your stomach. But how do you interpret that feeling? Well, if you interpret it as being excited to get onto the stage, that's going to increase your self-efficacy. But if you experience these butterflies as stage fright or anxiety, then that's going to decrease your self-efficacy for this kind of task and similar tasks. Now, in general, the more at ease you are with a particular type of task, the higher your self-efficacy for that type of task will be. So how do we go about using the model to increase our self-efficacy? Well, there are 4 approaches we can take based on the 4 factors we've just looked at. And by the way, if you're a manager, you can also use these approaches to help build a team member's self-efficacy. So the first approach is to master task. So to begin increasing your self-efficacy for a particular task, start setting realistic but challenging goals based on where you are right now. Then, when you succeed with that goal, build on it by setting a slightly more challenging goal. Over time, the hope is that these accomplishments will grow to build you a high self-efficacy for that type of task. So, for example, suppose right now you are terrified of public speaking. You could begin building your self-efficacy by merely attending a public speaking meeting in a safe environment outside of the workplace, something like Toastmasters, for example. Now, over time, you might start to speak at these events and your self-efficacy will begin to grow. And once your self-efficacy is high enough, you will eventually feel confident enough that you can transfer your newfound speaking prowess back into the more pressurized environment of the workplace. The second approach is to model behavior. So this means find role models to observe who have a high self-efficacy in the area or skill where you're looking to build your own self-efficacy. Now, these role models can be a powerful motivating force, especially if they have also built their self-efficacy from a similar position to where yours is right now.
And see, that's where students are going to need us most. They're going to need us to model for them, especially when math is, whatever their subject areas, but, in particular, math is their weak spot. Because if they don't know how to do the problem, this is why it's like, if you've been in the classroom, you totally understand this. You give an assignment and then you release the students to work. What you'll find is that if you don't model out like one of the first problems, they'll be stuck. They'll look around for like the first couple of minutes and you'll look at your students like, what are we doing? Like, I told you can work. And they're looking like, help us, because they need us to model out how to, approach the math in a confident manner and how to improve in their levels of self-efficacy and their levels of confidence. So I found that very interesting that he said that. So let's get back to what this expert is saying about.
The third approach is social persuasion. Now, while modeling behavior is about observing others directly who have achieved a high self-efficacy, social persuasion is about finding mentors or coaches. These are people who will work directly with you to build your self-efficacy step by step, as they have themselves been there and done that.
Step by step. This is not a try harder thing. This is step by step. This is why I have a framework that models this, that supports you guys all over this nation with how we can do this effectively for our students.
They can help lead you to a high self-efficacy more quickly than you could achieve under your own initiative. And the final approach is to improve your emotional state. We all interpret our past experiences and we all interpret the sensations coming from our bodies. Sometimes we can misinterpret this information. So suppose you get nervous before giving a presentation. Now, this feeling is perfectly natural, but suppose we believe that we're bad at performing presentations. The feeling is so strong, it affects our performance in our presentation. Now, that's obviously bad. And because of our poor performance in our last presentation, we further believe in our mind that we're no good at presentations. Thus, we get even more nervous the next time we have to do one. But it's not that we're actually bad at presentations. It's just that we have interpreted the signals wrong. If we could learn over time to interpret these signals positively, we could improve our self-efficacy around doing presentations significantly.
And that, I'll stop there because that talks about that optimistic piece, that growth mindset type of piece where, you know, you have to change the mindset of students, you know, of that fixed mindset of, oh, I'm not good, to realizing, hey, I'm not as good as I, you know, am aspiring to be, but I'm on my way. You know, like it's like you leave that open for them to continue to grow. So I hope that helps you best understand self-efficacy and motivation and the theory around it, and how self-efficacy is a motivation theory. So I want to also go back into another article where they're talking to us more about grit, self-efficacy, and like achievement in schools. Well, it's talking about investigating the relationships between grit, self-efficacy, and achievement orientation in schools. And so it's university participants, there's 258 of them, and the results demonstrated that grit, perseverance of effort, and consistency of interest were positive associates with academic performance. And they were through a sequel pathway of mediators, including self-efficacy. So self-efficacy was like getting them to their goal. So it was like a channel, a tunnel. So I think it's very interesting. I kind of want to scroll down and see if we can find that. They're talking about basically there's two students that are pursuing a bachelor's degree in chemistry. Both of them excelled and achieved a similar GPA. However, student A obtains a degree in order to score the highest and to be valued by their family and peers. She did it because of theory and things like that. So they're going to talk a little bit about some of these things. They said that research has shown that there are factors that impact academic outcomes for more general contextual variables like SES, parents' level of education, and whatnot, right? Those are cool. But then there's also the non-cognitive factors like grit that also affect, you know, motivation and learning goals. And so they talk about that. Too, is I want to get into some of their definitions, but also some of their visuals so that we can see what they're talking about. So they're talking about grit, again, Duckworth, how it's behaving passionately and assiduously to achieve a long-term goal target despite difficulties. In other words, people with greater levels of grit are more determined when trying to overcome obstacles. They also persist in maintaining interest in order to achieve their targets despite difficulties or lack of support, by Arslan et al. Previous studies have also indicated that grit is positively associated with a range of outcomes, such as freshman year retention, academic engagement, and self-reported grades, and post-secondary aspirations. Excellent. They also talked about how there's a theoretical predictive influence of grit. Students who want higher grades, they're going to have more grit relative to a student who avoids learning. So basically, grittier students practice significantly more self-regulated learning strategies, right? Such as valuing the learned material, powerful, bolstering their self-efficacy, and employing cognitive and motivational study strategies. See how all of this is intertwined? We're hearing the same thing throughout. And so let's keep going. So it says that this grit, the constructive grit in this study, it consists of two dimensions: perseverance of effort and consistency of interest. And so I know some teachers are like, oh, well, I don't want to, reward my kids for effort. Well, I'll tell you this, especially when you have students that are dealing with anxiety and they feel like they can't perform in a math class. Effort, dealing with students who are overcoming a fear of math anxiety, they don't feel like they're mathers, like they can do math. Then, having that ability for them to show their effort and reward them for their effort is key to getting them to finally cross over with intrinsic motivation and being able to really trying to improve their academic performance. So just keep that in mind. Let's keep going into the next part of this awesome study that we found, and learning goals that were orientations that were resulting in higher GPAs. Let's keep going because I want to show you guys the visual. They're talking about academic goal orientations, huge. So it says it defines the construct that an individual's belief that reveals the reasons why he or she approaches and engages in academic tasks. So that these can also help students with their overall GPA. And it also talks about specific goals that shape the framework as to how individuals interpret, experience, and perform their achievement pursuits. It says the achievement goal orientation literature has evolved over time, and it proposed a dichotomous framework of achievement goals, in which is comprised by mastery and performance goals. Okay. And so it's a 3 categories. So it talks about mastery, performance approach, and performance avoidance goals. Then they have another model and stuff, but I want to get down to it's talking about Bandura again, and how his definition is people's judgment of their capabilities to organize and execute courses of action that are required to attain designated types of performance. And his theory, he did this back in the day, but it's very effective, and people, built upon it, of course, but it's solid. It's like your original Bach or Mozart. It's like a standard. And so it's talking here, research has evidence that numerous mediators and moderators influence the relationship between self-efficacy and academic performance, including effort regulation, deep processing strategies, and goal orientation behaviorally. Now they're talking about self-efficacy in the lens of behavior and how it impacts student behavior. So it says higher student efficacy affords students the skills and attitudes that promote success and achievement. So again, you need self-efficacy because it's helping students with their skills and attitudes that promote success and achievement. And it's also correlated with self-regulation learning strategies, right? They feel like they can do it. Yeah, they're going to take control. So they start setting goals. So there's that goal setting piece, monitoring. So that's that kind of like that time management, being responsible, reaction, and reflection, holding themselves responsible, and then having that cognition, motivation, behavior, and context, which is powerful as to, again, how this is a motivational theory. So let's keep going. It says here, this guy here expressed that self-efficacy directly influences students' amount of effort invested in their learning, their persistence, types of learning tasks, and their ultimate achievement. So research has also shown that highly efficacious students manage their work time better, so it's that time management, derive more pleasure and enjoyment from tasks, so they're intrinsically motivated, and they employ deeper cognitive processing. Excellent. So they also do more challenging tasks, they obtain better grades. Hence, the study hypnotized that gritty people with high self-efficacy have a lofty academic expectation, and they're more likely to adopt mastery goals. However, as self-efficacy decreases, the tendency to adopt performance approach and avoidance goals increases, right? So a lack of self-efficacy is recycled as avoidance goals. They start avoiding it. They start giving up on it. Isn't that interesting? So, and then it talks about a study model. I want to get into this. I want to show you this. All of this is research heavy stuff, which, I'll leave that for you dorks to look at in your own time. But let's look at the conceptual model. Let's look at how this is intertwined and connected. So we see grit does not stand by itself, neither does self-efficacy. These things work together. So this is pretty cool. They have grit consistency of interest, right? They have grit as a perseverance of effort. So your consistency of effort or interest and your perseverance of effort, they merge together to affect your self-efficacy or build your self-efficacy, which then tears off into these 3 areas: performance avoidance goals, performance approach goals, and mastery goals. So depending on how all of it goes, you're wanting your performance to go in those last 2 buckets, right? But if the teacher does not effectively build that self-efficacy, if they have a negative self-efficacy, that teacher's not able to increase those self-efficacy levels, it will go into performance avoidance, and it will have, unfortunately, a decrease of academic performance and negative GPA. But if a teacher is successful at helping with performance goals and even mastery goals, that can lead to an increase in academic performance. So I want to leave this up here for you guys to look at and to just kind of really understand this, how it's all intertwined. We need teachers. The goal here, guys, we've got to work on that self-efficacy so that performance and mastery of our learners will result in academic performance. So with that said, thanks so much for letting me share. I loved talking about this with you guys. They have way more, as you can see. But what we'll do is we'll stop there because I want you guys to dork it out when you get a chance on your own time. And, you know, we can talk about this stuff all day. I can talk your ear off about grit anytime. And if you want me to, just invite me to come and visit you. I'd love to. So with that said, today's session was great. We spoke about how grit, self-efficacy, and motivation impact student achievement. Thank you for listening and being there with me. Now, I want to make some announcements with you as we're wrapping up today. The Grit and Equity podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White, will be featured on the X Factor EDU network, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph. And it also can be found on Spotify. It can also be found on all of the social media platforms as well. And speaking of social media platforms, you can follow me on Facebook, Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indy Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indy238. YouTube is India White123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. Check out the website also, www.india-white.com. You'll find books, blogs. You'll find, information on speaking events and things like that. You'll be able to find workbooks on there, grit workbooks, the grit framework, all kind of cool things for you. Even access to my Kahoot games and stuff for you. Also, upcoming events. I'll see you guys in August at the Silicon Valley Conference. I'll see you Rockstars in Minnesota. I'll see you at the end of the month in August. I will be at NCSM and NCTM in good spirits to see all of you lovely, wonderful people there. We'll be at ICTM as well. We'll be at OCTM. We'll be at ATM&E and at the Northwest Math Conference and some other places as well. Thank you to everyone for your support. However, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm super excited. Can't wait to join y'all. And then, of course, check out the Grit Mini Workshop whenever you get a chance. And then remember to share this podcast, because this podcast is if you are trying to close the achievement gap, but maybe you're having classroom management issues, or if your students aren't motivated to do the work, this is the perfect podcast for you. Today, we spoke about motivating our students with that self-efficacy and grit. Thank you so much again for tuning in to the Grit and Equity podcast. And until next time, stay gritty. See ya.